I guess I'll start by saying I've never been great at sharing personal stuff, but I'm at my limit. I need to let this out before it eats me alive. My name's Ethan, I'm 23, and I'm in college, working 2 part-time jobs to keep myself afloat. On paper, living with my parents sounds like a sweet deal. Free rent, no need to juggle rent checks on top of tuition. But trust me, it's not the dream you'd think. The reason? My older sister, Amanda. Amanda's 25 and has been the golden child since birth. You know the type. Growing up, if she brought home a C on her report card, my parents would cheer like she cured cancer. At least she tried, they'd say, like that was some groundbreaking accomplishment. Meanwhile, if I got an A instead of an A, I'd be getting the disappointed looks and a lecture about how I could do better. It wasn't just school. Amanda skated through everything while I got stuck picking up the slack. Dishes? Oh, Amanda was busy with her friends. Laundry? She's got so much going on. Ethan, can't you help out? But if I forgot to take out the trash once? It was suddenly a family discussion about my lack of discipline. The favoritism didn't just stop at chores. Amanda has a long history of bad decisions, but none worse than her ex, Kyle. I swear, this guy could charm his way into a bank vault and walk out with nothing but lint in his pockets. He was manipulative, controlling, and completely useless. He wrapped Amanda around his finger, convincing her to hand over her money to fund whatever dream he was chasing at the time. His failed podcast, his custom sneaker business, or some other half-baked idea. The worst part was that Amanda never saw it. She'd loan him money, tell me about it, and when I'd point out how blatantly he was using her, she'd snap back with something like, "You don't understand us. He just needs a little help." My parents? They waved it off, saying, "She's an adult. Let her make her own choices." Eventually, Kyle dumped her, leaving her with maxed-out credit cards and a sob story about how he just needed space to grow. Of course, my parents immediately swooped in to help her, pulling from savings to pay off some of her debts and even co-signing for her first apartment. Meanwhile, I was working after school and taking every summer job I could find to save for college. I never hated Amanda, but the resentment built up over the years. It was like no matter how much I tried to do the right thing, she always got to be the center of attention. She didn't graduate high school with honors, didn't go to college, and bounced from one retail job to another, quitting or getting fired every few months. And yet, every time she landed a new job, my parents acted like she was climbing the corporate ladder. When she finally moved out into her own place last year, I thought things might finally change. Maybe, without her around, my parents would start to notice how much effort I was putting in. And for a while, it felt like a fresh start. The house was quieter, the constant comparisons stopped, and I could focus on my classes and work without feeling like I was living in someone's shadow. But then the comments started. My mom would mention how hard things were for Amanda. "Rent's so expensive these days," she'd say over dinner, or "She's trying her best, but it's tough out there." I'd nod along, thinking, well, yeah, that's adulthood. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured Amanda would figure it out eventually, and it wasn't my problem. Then, one evening, my parents sat me down at the dining table. The way they did it, calm, serious, like we were about to discuss a family crisis, immediately made my stomach churn. "Ethan," my dad started, folding his hands like he was about to deliver some sage advice. "Your mom and I have been talking, and we're so proud of everything you've accomplished. You've got a scholarship, you're working hard. You've really set yourself up for success."
Thanks.
I said, unsure of where this was going. Well, my mom jumped in. "Amanda's been struggling a bit. Her rent is really high, and her job isn't covering everything." I frowned. "Okay. We were thinking," my dad continued, "since you're saving so much living here rent-free, maybe you could help her out for a few months, just until she gets back on her feet." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You want me to pay her rent?" I asked, my voice rising. "She's your sister," my mom said. Like that explained everything. "She's an adult," I shot back. "Shouldn't she figure it out herself?" "She's trying," my dad said, his tone firm now. "Not everyone has the same opportunities you've had. It's only fair." "Fair," I repeated, my voice shaking. I'm working 2 jobs and going to school full-time. How is it fair that I have to pay for her mistakes? You're being selfish, Ethan, my mom said, shaking her head like I just disappointed her on some deep level. If the situation were reversed, Amanda would help you. I almost laughed at that. No, she wouldn't, I said, standing up from the table. She's never helped anyone but herself. The argument went on for what felt like hours. They accused me of not caring about my family, of turning my back on Amanda when she needed me. I told them it wasn't my responsibility, that I was already stretched thin, and that Amanda needed to grow up. But nothing I said mattered. To them, Amanda was always going to be the one worth saving, and I was the one who needed to give more. By the end of it, I was questioning myself. Was I being selfish? Should I just suck it up and help her out to keep the peace? But the resentment was boiling over, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could keep being the one who sacrificed while Amanda coasted. Something had to give, and I wasn't sure what it would be. After that conversation, I spent the next few days stewing. Every time I thought about my parents sitting there, looking so calm and certain that it was my job to bail Amanda out, my stomach churned. I couldn't shake the anger. It wasn't even about the money, though, trust me, I didn't exactly have cash to spare. It was about how they had this endless reservoir of excuses for her, and somehow, I was always the one left to clean up the mess. Still, part of me couldn't stop replaying their words. She'd do the same for you, my mom had said. That was a joke. Amanda wouldn't have lifted a finger for me unless it was to scroll past my name on her phone. But what if I was being too harsh? What if, for once, she really was trying? I told myself I'd give it some thought and see how I felt in a few days. That didn't last long. 3 days later, I was scrolling through Instagram during my break at work, sipping on a cheap gas station coffee because I was trying to save money. Right there, smack in the middle of my feed, was Amanda's latest post. It was a boomerang video of her holding up a fancy cocktail at some rooftop bar, the city skyline twinkling behind her. The caption read, "Treat yourself. Life's too short not to enjoy it." I nearly dropped my phone. Treat yourself? Was she kidding? While I was busting my ass working 2 jobs and agonizing over whether I should help her, she was out having the time of her life. That night, I went home and brought it up to my mom. I tried to keep my tone casual, but I'm pretty sure the frustration bled through. "So, Amanda's rent is covered now, right?" I asked while she was doing the dishes. "Yes," she said, glancing at me with a small smile. "Thanks to you, she doesn't have to worry about falling behind." Cool, I said, nodding. "Just curious, does she need more help or anything? Because she doesn't really seem, stressed about money." My mom turned to face me, her expression shifting into one of mild disapproval. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, she's been going out a lot," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Fancy bars, shopping trips." I saw her post about getting her nails done yesterday. "She's allowed to enjoy herself, Ethan," my mom said, crossing her arms. "Just because she's having a hard time doesn't mean she has to live like a monk." "Sure, but how is she affording it?" I pressed. "She's using her own money," she snapped. "Honestly, Ethan, it's not your place to micromanage her life." I let out a bitter laugh. "I'm the one paying her rent. If anyone has a right to ask questions, it's me." "Ethan, enough," she said, her voice firm. "Amanda is doing her best, and it's not fair for you to criticize how she spends her time. She's been through a lot, and she needs support, not judgment." I dropped it after that, but the frustration was bubbling under the surface. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Amanda wasn't trying to get back on her feet. She was using my money to keep coasting through life, just like she always had. The next weekend, I went over to her apartment to confront her. I wasn't planning on causing a scene. I just wanted to hear her side of things. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, she looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside before she could shut the door on me. Her apartment was nice, too nice for someone who was supposedly struggling to make ends meet. The furniture was modern and clean, and there were fresh flowers on the coffee table. She flopped onto the couch, looking bored. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Your rent," I said, sitting down across from her. And the fact that I've been paying it while you've been out living it up? Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I've seen your Instagram, Amanda. The bars, the shopping, the spa days. You don't look like someone who's struggling to pay their bills. Her expression hardened. Wow, Ethan. Stalking my social media now? That's a new low. Don't deflect, I said, keeping my tone firm. I'm working 2 jobs and skipping meals to save money, and you're out here drinking cocktails on rooftops. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? She rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic. First of all, I am struggling. I just know how to make the most of what I have. Second, it's not like I forced you to help me. That was your choice. It wasn't a choice, I snapped. Mom and Dad guilt me into it, and you know it. She shrugged. Well, I didn't ask them to. Her indifference was like a slap in the face. I stood up, fists clenched. You know what, Amanda? You're right. You didn't ask. But that doesn't make it okay for you to take advantage of me. I'm done. Pay your own rent. Her jaw dropped. Ethan, wait. But I didn't wait. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. For the first time, I felt like I'd finally stood up for myself. The guilt and frustration were still there, but at least now, I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. I didn't hear from Amanda after that, which wasn't a surprise. If there was one thing she was good at, it was playing the victim when things didn't go her way. I figured she'd either run to Mom and Dad to complain or just ignore me altogether. Honestly, I didn't care which. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd drawn a line she couldn't cross. A week later, my mom called me. Her tone was clipped, a sure sign she was upset. Ethan, she started. Her voice heavy with that fake calm she always used when she was trying to guilt me. I just got off the phone with Amanda. She said you're refusing to help her now? I sighed, already feeling the frustration bubbling up. That's right. I'm done paying her rent. Ethan, how could you do that? She's your sister, and she's going through such a hard time. She's not going through a hard time, Mom. She's spending my money on shopping sprees and spa days, while I'm working 2 jobs and barely scraping by. That's not struggling. That's taking advantage. She's not taking advantage of you, Mom insisted. She's just trying to make the best of a difficult situation. And honestly, Ethan, this attitude of yours is really disappointing. Disappointing? I repeated, incredulous. You know what's disappointing, Mom? Watching you and Dad bend over backward for her, while I'm killing myself to stay afloat, and no one seems to care. That's not fair, she said, her tone sharpening. We're proud of everything you've accomplished, but Amanda needs more help right now. No, I said firmly. She doesn't. She needs to grow up and take responsibility for her own life. Mom went quiet for a moment, and I could feel her frustration radiating through the phone. Finally, she said, You're going to regret this someday, Ethan. Family is all we have. Maybe if you actually held Amanda accountable for once, she wouldn't be in this mess, I shot back. But I'm done cleaning up after her. I hung up before she could say anything else. For the rest of the night, I felt torn between anger and guilt. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, but the other part knew I was right. Amanda wasn't going to change if everyone kept enabling her, and I wasn't going to keep sacrificing myself for someone who clearly didn't appreciate it. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I figured my parents were stewing, trying to figure out how to fix things without my help. Then, one evening, I got a text from my cousin Ryan. Hey man, did you know Amanda's hanging out with Kyle again? I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Kyle? Her ex? The one who drained her finances and left her in ruins. I texted back. What do you mean? Are you sure? Ryan replied almost immediately. Saw them at a coffee shop near her place. Looked pretty cozy. Thought you should know. I couldn't believe it. After everything Kyle had done to her. After all the money, the drama, the heartbreak. She was back in his orbit? My first instinct was to text her, but I stopped myself. Amanda wasn't going to listen to me, and I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I decided to do a little digging. I opened Venmo and searched for her account. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but something told me there was more to the story. It didn't take long to find what I needed. There, in her transaction history, were multiple payments to Kyle. The captions were vague: groceries, thanks, you owe me one. But the pattern was clear. She wasn't just hanging out with him. She was funneling money to him. I felt sick. My money, the money I'd been working my ass off to earn, had been going to Kyle. This wasn't just irresponsibility, it was outright betrayal. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to go, but I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. When I walked in, they were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee. "Ethan," my mom said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "What's going on?" Dad asked, frowning. "It's about Amanda," I said, pulling out my phone. "And Kyle." Their faces stiffened at the mention of his name. "What about him?" Mom asked, her voice cautious. I opened the Venmo app and placed my phone on the table. She's been sending him money. The rent money I was giving her? It wasn't going to her landlord. It was going to Kyle. They stared at the screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" Dad asked, his voice hesitant. "Yes, I'm sure," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "This isn't some mistake. She's been lying to all of us." Mom looked like she was about to cry. "I can't believe she would do this," she whispered. "Believe it," I said. "And maybe now you'll understand why I'm done helping her." For once, they didn't argue. They just sat there, staring at the proof in front of them, and for the first time, I felt like they might actually hold Amanda accountable. Whether they would or not, I didn't know. But I was done carrying the weight of her choices. It was time for her to face the consequences on her own. A few days after I dropped the bombshell about Amanda and Kyle, the fallout began. My parents didn't bring it up to me directly, typical, but I could tell they were grappling with what to do. They were quieter than usual, and I caught a few hushed conversations when I was around. One evening, I overheard my mom say, "We just need to talk to her. Maybe there's more to the story." I almost laughed out loud. More to the story? What possible explanation could there be for sending money to the guy who ruined her life the first time? But I kept my mouth shut. Let them figure it out. I didn't have to wait long for things to boil over. That weekend, Amanda showed up at my parents' house with her usual air of fake confidence. She walked in with her bag slung over her shoulder and a look on her face that screamed, "I'm the victim here." I was sitting in the living room when she arrived, and the moment she saw me, her expression darkened. "Seriously?" she said, dropping her bag onto the floor. "You couldn't just mind your own business?" "Nice to see you too, Amanda," I said, leaning back on the couch. "You didn't have to tell Mom and Dad," she snapped, crossing her arms. "Now they're freaking out, and it's all your fault." "No," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It's your fault for lying to them, and to me." "I didn't lie," she said defensively. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "You used the money I gave you to pay Kyle," I said, standing up. "You told me you were struggling to pay rent, and it turns out you were funneling it to that loser. How is that not lying?" She opened her mouth to respond, but our mom came in before she could get a word out. "Amanda," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Amanda turned to her, her expression softening into something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Mom, it's not what you think," she said. "Then explain it to me," Mom said, holding her ground for once. Amanda sighed dramatically and flopped onto one of the kitchen chairs. "Look, Kyle's been going through a rough time, okay? He needed help, and I couldn't just let him struggle." "A rough time?" my dad said, stepping into the room. "Amanda, that man used you for years. He drained your finances and left you to clean up the mess. Why would you go back to him?" "It's not like that anymore," Amanda said, her voice rising. "He's trying to change, and he just needed a little support. What was I supposed to do? Turn my back on him?" "Yes," I said bluntly. Amanda shot me a glare. "You don't understand, Ethan. You've never understood." "I understand perfectly," I said, crossing my arms. "I understand that you've been lying to everyone to keep him in your life, even after everything he's done. And I understand that you don't care who you hurt as long as you get what you want." "That's not true," she shouted, but her voice cracked, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shaken. Mom sat down across from her, her face a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Amanda," she said softly, "why didn't you tell us? Why did you feel like you had to hide this?" Amanda looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "Because I knew you'd react like this," she muttered. "I knew you wouldn't understand." "What's there to understand?" Dad said, his voice sharp. "You've been lying to us, to Ethan, to everyone. And for what? To help a man who doesn't deserve it? He's the father of my child." Amanda blurted out, her voice cracking. The room went silent. "What did you just say?" Mom whispered. Amanda looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "Kyle's the father of my child," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, stunned. A child? She had a child and hadn't told anyone? My head was spinning as I tried to process what she just said. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "Because I didn't want you to judge me," Amanda said, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't want you to think I'd failed. I've been trying to handle everything on my own, but it's been so hard." "On your own?" I said, my voice rising. "Amanda, you've been using my money to pay him off. That's not handling things on your own." "I didn't know what else to do," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I didn't want him to take me to court. I didn't want to lose my child." My dad let out a heavy sigh, rubbing a hand over his face. "Amanda, why didn't you come to us sooner?" "I didn't think you'd help me," she said, her voice small. Mom reached out and took her hand, her eyes softening. "We're your parents, Amanda. Of course we would have helped you. But lying to us, hiding something like this, it makes it so much harder to trust you." I stayed quiet, watching as my mom comforted her, while my dad looked like he was deciding whether to yell or cry. Part of me felt bad for her. She was clearly overwhelmed. But another part of me was furious. She had dragged me into this mess, lied to my face, and now expected everyone to feel sorry for her. When Amanda finally left, my parents sat down with me. "Ethan," my mom said, "I know this has been hard on you, but please don't give up on your sister. She needs us right now." "She needed us years ago," I said flatly. "But you let her get away with everything, and now it's come to this. I'm not going to fix this for her, Mom. She has to face the consequences." They didn't argue with me, but I could see the disappointment in their eyes. It didn't matter, though. For the first time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. Not for them, but for me. The next few weeks were chaos. Amanda moved back in with my parents, dragging all her baggage, both literal and metaphorical, into their house. I didn't visit, but Ryan kept me updated. "It's like nothing's changed," he said one day over the phone. "Your mom's doting on her, your dad's grumbling but still helping, and Amanda's acting like the victim. It's a circus over there." I wasn't surprised. My parents had always been quick to sweep Amanda's messes under the rug. Still, knowing they were enabling her again stirred up old frustrations. It felt like no matter how badly she screwed up, they'd always find a way to justify it. The thing that set me off, though, was when I heard about the eviction notice. Ryan mentioned it casually, but the second he said it, my blood boiled. "Wait," I interrupted. "She's getting evicted? What happened to all the rent money I gave her?" "She didn't pay it," Ryan said bluntly. "Her landlord was fed up. Guess she was months behind." I clenched the phone tighter. "Are you kidding me? She didn't even try to keep up with her rent? What was she doing with all the money?" "Spending it on Kyle, probably," Ryan said. "And let's be real, your parents are going to bail her out, like always." Of course they did. My mom called me a few days later, her tone sickly sweet. "Ethan, I know you've been frustrated with Amanda, but we really need to pull together as a family right now. She's going through so much." "I'm not giving her any more money, Mom," I said before she could even ask. "She doesn't need money," my mom replied quickly, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "But she's looking for a new apartment, and we thought maybe you could help her with some job applications. You're so good at that sort of thing." I almost laughed. "You mean the job application she'll quit after a month? No thanks." "Ethan, don't be like this," she said, her voice softening into that guilt-tripping tone she'd mastered over the years. "She's trying." "No, she's not," I said firmly. "And the more you let her get away with this, the worse it's going to get. You're not helping her, You're just delaying the inevitable. My mom didn't respond, and after a long pause, she sighed. I just wish you'd show a little more compassion, she said, her disappointment practically dripping through the phone. I've shown enough compassion, I snapped. Now it's time for Amanda to show some responsibility. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and relief. I was finally standing my ground, but it was exhausting. Part of me wanted to just cut ties entirely, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet, anyway. A few days later, I found out through Ryan that Amanda's landlord had filed a formal complaint, escalating the eviction process. My parents were scrambling to find her a new place, but Amanda didn't seem bothered. She's acting like it's not a big deal, Ryan said. Your dad's losing his mind trying to figure out how to fix this, and she's just sitting on her phone like nothing's happening. Typical Amanda. When I confronted my parents about it during a rare visit, they were defensive as usual. She's just overwhelmed, my mom said, handing Amanda's toddler a snack while Amanda scrolled through Instagram on the couch. She's not overwhelmed, I said, keeping my voice steady. She's lazy, and you're enabling her. That's enough, Ethan, my dad said sharply. We're doing what we can to support her. If you don't want to help, fine, but don't make it harder for us. Harder for you? I repeated, my voice rising. She's the one making it harder for everyone. When are you going to stop cleaning up her messes and let her deal with the consequences? Ethan, she's family, my mom said, her voice breaking slightly. So am I shot back. But you only seem to care about fixing Amanda's life, no matter how many times she screws it up. They didn't have an answer for that. I left soon after, barely managing to keep my temper in check. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. I'd done everything I could to help Amanda, and it had blown up in my face. My parents refused to see reason, and Amanda refused to change. I felt like I was stuck in a never-ending cycle of chaos, with no way out. But then it hit me. I didn't have to be part of the cycle anymore. I could walk away. The next morning, I packed up the last of my things from my parents' house. They weren't home, so there was no dramatic goodbye. Just quiet relief as I left my key on the counter and shut the door behind me. I was done. Let them deal with Amanda's messes. Let them see what it was like to handle her without me as a backup plan. For the first time in years, I felt free. The guilt, the frustration, the constant feeling of being taken advantage of, it was gone. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. It was finally mine to figure out. A few weeks passed, and I didn't hear much from my family. It was almost unsettling at first, like the calm after a storm. But the silence felt good. No guilt trips, no demands for help, no updates about Amanda's never-ending drama. Then, one evening, my mom called. I let it ring, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Hi, Ethan, she started, her voice softer than usual. I just wanted to let you know that Amanda found a new apartment. That's great, I said flatly, waiting for the inevitable ask. She's trying to get things back on track, Mom continued. She's looking at jobs, and your dad's helping her with the deposit. There it was. Same story, different day. Okay, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Mom hesitated, like she wanted to say more. We miss you, she finally said. I took a deep breath. I miss you too, Mom, but I meant what I said. I can't keep putting myself in the middle of this. Amanda has to figure it out on her own. There was a long pause before she sighed. I understand, Ethan. I wish things were different. Me too, I admitted, though I wasn't sure if I really meant it. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I didn't know if Amanda would ever change, or if my parents would stop enabling her. But I did know one thing. I was done letting their chaos control my life. For the first time, I felt like I had finally taken back my peace. And no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to let it go.